So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Lawyers' Vigil for the Rule of Law. On Sunday morning, I put up a Facebook post to let the internet know that some lawyers were going to gather together here today to respond to Sheriff Joe's pardon. I'm not that popular on Facebook. People don't really like my posts, so apparently some of you reposted, so thank you. We're delighted to see so many of you here, lawyers and others who brave the heat to affirm in a public way that no one is above the law and that orders of our courts must be respected. For many, the idea of a vigil connotes silence. But we're lawyers, so this vigil has speakers. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Judge Noel Fidel, rising star of the next generation of lawyers in Phoenix, Andy Guyana, and former Attorney General Grant Woods to talk to us about the importance of the rule of law.
Good afternoon. Former Judge Fidel, I should point out, I'm now a working lawyer like most of the crowd. We're here this afternoon in front of the Sandra Day O'Connor Courthouse, where two of the resident judges have enforced or attempted to enforce one of the paramount responsibilities of courts in our democracy. And we're here as lawyers because all of us have taken an oath to defend and attempt to enforce the Constitution. And we understand the role of the courts, the importance of the courts in a divided government. Justice Marshall said near the very outset of our republic that the role of the courts is to say what the law is. And that role, the ability of the courts to say what the law is the only binding constraint on the massive powers that we give to the executive branch and to law enforcement in general. We entrust law enforcement to detain. We entrust them with the power to deprive people of freedom. We entrust them with the power at times to use violence, even fatal violence, in service to that end. And where there is power, as we all know, there is the vast potential for abuse of power. So what do we trust to prevent that abuse of power? Where do we look? Who do we look to? Well, first, we look to the self-restraint, to the ethics and morality of law enforcement themselves. But beyond that, that sometimes fails, as we all know. And we look to the courts, not only to say what the law is, but to order conformity with the law, and in rare instances to back up those orders with contempt. Now, contempt, lawyers mostly appreciate, is very rarely used. And criminal contempt even more rare, because criminal contempt requires a trial and a finding of willful violation, deliberate violation of a court order. It is extraordinarily rare, but this is a case study, if you will, in both the abuse of power and the willful contempt of court orders. Let's talk briefly about some aspects of that contempt. First, there's the contempt for the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, as we all know, guarantees equal protection of the laws. And every law enforcement officer takes an oath to defend and respect the Constitution, including equal protection of the laws. There's no exception for county sheriffs when it comes to that requirement. Sheriff Arpaio demonstrated his contempt for the 14th Amendment, and I might add for the Latino population of Arizona, when he made driving while brown a restrainable offense in Arizona, and a centerpiece of his public posture. One federal judge in this courthouse took evidence, and after evaluating the evidence, recognized that behavior not as accidental, not as an oversight, but as racial profiling, and he gave detailed orders for how the Sheriff's Department could cease and desist from its racial profiling. And then another judge in this courthouse took evidence and found that Sheriff Arpaio had willfully, deliberately violated that order. That's one aspect of contempt. Another aspect of contempt is for the truth, and more specifically for truth-telling under oath in court. We won't get into external truth-telling or its absence, such as the birther episode. The focus here is on contempt of court. What was Sheriff Arpaio's defense? Well, he didn't really understand the order. And also another aspect of it was he's getting older. He really didn't know what was going on in his department. Not something, by the way, that he told the public in his repeated campaigns for public office, one of which he seems to want to launch again. That defense was floated in court in the criminal contempt trial, and the court took the evidence, evaluated the evidence, and said no, not only were the violations knowing, deliberate, willful, they were flagrant. Sheriff Arpaio thumbed his nose at the courts and its orders in the public press and in the public domain. So that's another aspect of contempt. Well, there are many instances of abuse of power. What finally brought the sheriff down in the public eye was hubris, and it brought him down in the courts too, because his contempt was so deliberate and his abuses were so deliberate. Now he has his pardon. Now he says that he wants to go further and clear his name. Sorry, Sheriff. The lawyers here know, and much of the public knows, that your name from this point forward is a watchword for abuse of power, and it will follow you wherever you go. Thank you. But in the larger scheme of things, Sheriff Arpaio's offenses, despite any delusions of grandeur he may have, were petty criminality compared with the significance of the pardon that he has just received. The president said in issuing the pardon that he was convicted for doing his job. His job? Was it okay? Was it doing his job to use Arizona Latinos as a pawn in his quest for repeated office? Was it okay to defy the 14th Amendment and the Constitution that he took an oath to enforce? Was it okay to defy law in general and all of the constraints that it attempts to place on power? Was it okay to disdain and publicly disrespect the efforts by the courts to rein him in? And was it okay to defy explicit orders by the judges in this courthouse to stop and desist his blatant violations? You know, we risk these days becoming numb to the implications of behavior like the president's pardon. After all, he recently told an assembled group of law officers that it would be okay to rough up criminal suspects a little. That from the highest office in the land. We can't be numb. We lawyers especially can't be numb. We have a constitution to help uphold and protect. So we're here today. I won't give a crowd estimate. Those lack credibility these days. But you know, our president seems to need a civic lesson, and part of our job as lawyers, I would say, is to help give him that lesson every day for the foreseeable future. Thank you.
So thank you, Judge Fidel. I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a cold here. But I am humbled to have been asked to speak alongside both Judge Fidel and Grant Woods, two pillars of our legal community to whom we all owe a debt of gratitude for their years of public service and their continued willingness to be the forefront of important issues like this. But beyond, yes, round of applause for that. But beyond humility, being here today with all of you gives me a feeling of hope that I haven't had in some time, given the constant stream of depressing news that comes out of Washington, D.C. every day. But why am I hopeful? Because on a late August day where the National Weather Service issued an extreme heat warning, so many attorneys, young and old, of every gender and orientation, brown, black, white, and every shade in between, Republicans and Democrats, chose to take time out of their days and stand in this plaza to take a stand. What we've seen over the past 8 months is that as much as lawyers are the butt of jokes, they play a critical role in fighting back against this administration and its cowardly enablers in this state and throughout the country. So I will be short in my remarks, and just to say that I'm asking everyone here, but in particular the young lawyers who I see, to embrace that role. Use the unique power of your law license to show the president, and more importantly, the rest of the world, that the rule of law means something, that courts and their orders are to be respected and followed, and that above all, nobody is above the law, particularly not those who are charged with enforcing it. Now with Sheriff Joe, what's done is done. The pardon has been issued. But let that pardon be a call to action. Take a pro bono case, or 5 preferably. Take a stand and recognize that silence is no longer an option. My children, your grandchildren are depending on it. Thank you for being here this afternoon, and with that, I'll pass the microphone to Grant Woods.
Right, well, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out here on an incredibly hot afternoon. I think it is important, though. It's important that you've done this. It's important that we do this as lawyers. The reporter just asked me, well, how come you're here if you're a Republican? And I would just, I guess, if you're really a Republican, if you're a true Republican, I would wonder why you're not here if you aren't here. The way this president has acted, the things that he's done in so many areas have nothing to do with the Republican Party that I grew up in. And it's certainly not reflective of someone who supposedly is a conservative. It's not conservative to abuse the Constitution and to call people heroes who systematically abuse the constitutional rights of American citizens. People who are conservative supposedly don't want big, powerful government, and there is no more powerful act of the government than to deprive someone of their liberty. When people do that based upon the color of someone's skin, there isn't a bigger outrage that could be in this country. And we had it right here in this county, front and center, for too long. The good news is we got rid of that guy. It's also not conservative to say that you believe in the rule of law, and then when you have judges who apply that rule of law, regardless of the status of the person that's in the defendant's chair, that you go after them personally. You say that it's all politics. You say it's because of their political backgrounds. You misrepresent who they are and what they've stood for their entire careers. We are the lawyers of this community, and we know these judges don't do that, that they put their personal feelings and politics aside, and it's great that in the shadow of the courtrooms where Arpaio was found guilty of contempt, we stand here to support those judges who did the right thing in this case. So Tim here knows in the front here that I wrote something for the Arizona Bar magazine right after the election of Donald Trump, which I guess was kind of controversial among some. And what I said was that we're going to be in, I predict, for a ride here where our dedication to the Constitution, our dedication as lawyers to the rule of law is going to be tested. I don't know if I knew it would be tested this often and this quickly. But my call then was for the lawyers in this county, in this state, and in our country to be the ones to stand up against these oppressive philosophies and actions that have been true of zealots who hide behind the will of the people against the Constitution, against basic human rights, now as they have done throughout world history. We've seen it before in world history, we're seeing it again. It's going to be up to the lawyers in our community to stand up and say, no, that's not how it works. We are from Arizona, and Arizona is better than we're often portrayed. And it's up to us, I think, to show the world that just as we have some of these characters who have gone out and abused the law and abused the Constitution, we also have lawyers like you who will stand up and fight them every step of the way. So lastly, yeah, there's not much we can do about that pardon, okay? It happened, that's okay. You know, the sheriff was taken out of office by the voters. He lost bigly, okay? And no, Mr. President, you're wrong. The people of Arizona don't like him in big numbers. The people of Maricopa County threw him out in big numbers for a variety of reasons. So now, what do we do in the future? I think that we have to not be afraid to stand up for basic human rights. We have to not be afraid to stand up against bigotry. Those of you who are conservatives know that it has nothing to do with liberal conservative. All of us believe that people should not be discriminated against because of their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, because of disability or gender. We can unite as Americans behind that. That's what this country is all about. So you know what? They can have the most powerful person in the world behind them, the President of the United States. We've got something better. We're on the right side of history here. We're on the right side of basic human decency, and at the end, we'll prevail. Thank you.
Thank you for standing in the sun with us today. There's some water around for the old people. As I listened to the speaker's reflections today on the abuses of power over a long period of time that the court behind us sought to remedy, I had to ask myself if we shouldn't have been out here long before now. Let's go back to work and work together so we don't have to be out here again.